I can still feel the strange weight of the envelope in my hand, even now. It wasn't much to look at, just a plain white paper envelope, light as air. But somehow, clutching it made my entire body feel heavier, like gravity had doubled just for me. It pressed down on my chest, making each breath thick and jagged, like the room itself had turned against me. I lifted my gaze slowly, and there stood my mother, Victoria Pierce. Her arms were folded tightly across her designer cardigan, that same cold, calculating half-smile twisting her lips, the one she always wore when she thought she was pulling off some clever life lesson at my expense. Behind her, my brother Brandon Pierce was already halfway down the freshly paved driveway, the metallic purr of his new jet black BMW filling the air like a taunt. His birthday gift. Actually, his second one, since apparently the first BMW wasn't the shade of midnight he had demanded. And me, I was standing there on my so-called milestone birthday, the day I officially crossed the threshold into adulthood, empty-handed, except for that damn envelope. I wasn't naive enough to expect balloons, or some elaborate cake with my name spelled out in icing, or even a signed card. I'd learned over the years to lower my expectations when it came to the Pierce family. But somewhere, buried under layers of self-preservation and practiced indifference, a tiny flicker of foolish hope still burned. A small, desperate ember that maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me with a kind word, a warm embrace, anything that told me I mattered. Instead, I pulled from the envelope a one-way bus ticket to Phoenix, Arizona. "You're 18 now," Victoria said smoothly, like she was handing me a winning lottery ticket instead of a dismissal notice. "Time to make your own way in the world." I stared at the slip of paper, the bus scheduled to leave the next morning. No return, no note, not even a good luck scribbled in the margins. My hands trembled as I clutched it, but not from fear exactly. It was something messier, a cocktail of humiliation, bitterness, and a deep, aching disbelief that buzzed through my body like electricity. My heartbeat roared in my ears, a deafening pulse that made it impossible to tell if I was about to sob or scream. In the end, I did neither. I looked back at her, slower this time, studying her face, but nothing had changed. Arms still rigidly crossed, lips still pursed in that superior, detached way, like she was waiting for me to say thank you for this gracious eviction. And there was Brandon again, strolling past the doorway, catching my eye with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Don't look so shocked, sis," he chuckled, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Hey, at least you got something, right?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I even say? That I had spent the past year burning the midnight oil freelancing graphic designs for clients who didn't even know I was still in high school. That I had applied to community colleges behind their backs, fully aware they wouldn't support me. That there had been birthdays where they literally forgot I existed. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Maybe it was instinct, maybe fear, or maybe I just refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble in front of them. "Thanks," I managed quietly, keeping my voice as steady as my shaking hands would allow. Victoria raised an eyebrow, as if daring me to challenge her decision. "You should be grateful, Alexandra. Most kids wouldn't even get this much." Grateful. That word settled in my chest like a slab of concrete, suffocating and cold. Was I supposed to bow at her feet for being discarded like yesterday's trash? I turned away without another word, my legs moving like they weren't even mine, propelling me up the staircase in silence. My room, no. Their spare room I'd occupied for years, suddenly felt alien, smaller, suffocating. The faded posters on the walls mocked me now. The comforter I'd picked out from a clearance rack 2 years ago looked cheap and childish. I sat on the edge of the bed, the bus ticket still clutched in my clammy hand. The silence in that house was suffocating, thick, pressing down like a storm cloud before the lightning strikes. The only sound breaking through was the relentless ticking of the old clock on my nightstand. Tick, tick, tick. Like it was counting down the moments until I'd finally vanish from their picture-perfect lives. I stared blankly at the wall, the minutes stretching into hours, as my mind raced in endless, numbing loops. Was I furious? Heartbroken? Relieved? Maybe all of it. Or maybe I had simply reached a point beyond feeling anything at all. Because somewhere in the heavy quiet of that night, something inside me quietly snapped. Not in a violent, explosive way, more like an old frayed thread finally breaking under years of tension. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to sob. I wasn't going to fight for a place they never intended for me. I was going to leave. And this time, they wouldn't see me as the invisible, unwanted shadow. They'd see me as someone they'd never get back. The next morning arrived not with fanfare, but with a muted hush, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of what I supposed I could still call my bed, watching slanted beams of pale gold stretch through the fractured blinds, slicing the floor into trembling bars of light and shadow. They painted the space in deceptive warmth, the kind that didn't reach the bones, certainly not mine. The softness of the sunrise clashed violently with the hollow ache inside me, an ache that pulsed with a quiet, exhausted defiance. I hadn't closed my eyes for even a moment. Sleep seemed like a luxury reserved for people whose worlds weren't caving in around them. My suitcase, a scuffed, stubborn thing, waited obediently by the door, packed hours ago with only the bare necessities. A few threadbare outfits, my frayed sketchbook, and the journal I'd always kept tucked behind the dresser, the one place Brandon never looked. What surprised me most, though, was the calm. It wasn't the soothing kind that whispered reassurance. It was sterile, stripped of softness, as if the grief had burned itself out in the long, suffocating hours of the night, leaving behind only a sharpened clarity. There were no goodbyes, no last-minute hugs, not even a mumbled "I'll miss you." No one checked my room. No one knocked. I could have already been gone, and they wouldn't have noticed. Descending the stairs felt like walking through an abandoned theater, after the show had closed. Empty, stale, forgotten. There at the granite-topped kitchen island sat Victoria Pierce, the ever-composed matriarch, scrolling her phone with a surgeon's precision, her manicured nails clicking like metronomes against the glass. She sipped her black coffee, unmoved, unfazed, as if the day was just another routine Tuesday. "Bus leaves at 10, she muttered, never bothering to lift her gaze. "I know," I replied, my voice steady, stripped of anything she might perceive as weakness. But still, she didn't look at me. Perhaps because locking eyes with me might have made it too real. Richard was already gone, slipping out the door hours ago, fleeing discomfort the way he always did. That was his gift, disappearing into his work like a magician in a cheap trick, only reappearing when the air was safe. The storm passed. There had been a time I resented him for that, but now I simply accepted it as one more thing I could never change. And Brandon? There he was, outside under the meticulous Arizona sun, lovingly polishing the already gleaming black BMW, as if it were the family heirloom they'd never admit it was. The same car they gifted him 2 years ago, the one with the blood-red leather seats, the absurdly expensive rims, the works. I could still see the memory of that day etched in perfect mocking detail. Victoria crying happy tears as she recorded him revving the engine, the family beaming like they had collectively created a masterpiece. I couldn't recall her ever crying for me. Not when I brought home awards, not when I came home sobbing after Brandon orchestrated yet another lunchroom humiliation, not even when I fractured my wrist tumbling off my bike at 11 and dragged myself alone to urgent care. Victoria, in her cold wisdom, called it tough love. I'd long since renamed it for what it truly was. Growing up in that house had been a masterclass in invisibility. I learned early how to exist in the margins, the forgotten corners, the spaces no one looked. Brandon filled every room without asking, his confidence loud and brazen. They let him, they adored him for it. Me, I made myself smaller and smaller until I practically vanished. I became an expert in reading Victoria's silent moods, sidestepping Brandon's venom, camouflaging my hurt behind polite smiles and nods. But I was never blind. I saw it all. The way Victoria looked at Brandon like he was her greatest accomplishment, and the way she looked at me like I was a puzzle piece she couldn't make fit. I sometimes wondered if she saw something in me that reminded her of the parts of herself she loathed. Or maybe I was just too quiet to ever matter. The truth is, I had stopped yearning for their approval long before that bus ticket landed in my lap like a slap. I had built my escape in the shadows, stashing money from freelance gigs, unrolling in online classes, hustling for art commissions like my life depended on it, because it did. I wasn't waiting to be rescued, I wasn't stupid. But even then, some small bruised part of me still wanted something from them. Not love, that ship had long since sunk, but acknowledgement, proof that I existed outside of the silhouette of their perfect sun. Instead, they gave me a ticket and silence. So I left, not with drama or rage, but with a breath that tasted like closure and one last glance at the house that had been a tomb more than a home. And when the Greyhound bus rolled away from the curb, something deep within me whispered, "Finally, it's your turn." The bus smelled like old leather and old regrets. I pressed my forehead against the cool, grimy window, cradling my backpack as if it could shield me from the truth that pulsed through me. The crumpled ticket sat like a ghost in my pocket. Phoenix, a city I'd never seen, a future I wasn't sure I could hold in my trembling hands. But I would walk into it with nothing left to lose, and that made me more dangerous than I had ever been. I didn't cry. Not when the skyline appeared in the distance, fractured and foreign, not when I stepped off the bus into a world where no one was waiting with open arms. But I would be lying if I said it didn't sting. There's a particular ache that settles into your bones when you realize your family never wanted to know the person you truly are. It isn't sharp. It's a dull, persistent bruise, the kind that only reminds you of its presence when someone bumps it by accident. It flared when I saw kids my age embraced by their parents at terminals, FaceTiming their mothers over mundane joys. I scrolled through pictures of happy, perfect families online and wondered what it felt like to be chosen, to be. I rented a cramped room above a bakery where the scent of cinnamon rolls seeped through the floorboards. Doris Williams, the owner, barely asked questions when I handed over 2 weeks of rent in cash. She just handed me the keys and smiled softly, like she already knew what I was running from. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Design gigs came in, logos, flyers, album covers. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me afloat. Then there was Marianne Ellis. She had been one of my clients, a tech founder based in downtown Phoenix, who once told me I had an old soul. When I emailed her, stripped of pride, and told her the truth, her reply arrived within minutes. "Meet me. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Wear confidence." And I did. Marianne was everything Victoria was not. Warm, direct, razor sharp. She didn't coddle me. She saw me. Within a week, I had a part-time role on her startup's branding team, and she even sent one of her drivers to collect me for meetings until I could afford to stand fully on my own. It felt like someone had finally opened a door I had been screaming at for years. And just as I was starting to feel steady, they came back. Brandon, of course, couldn't even bother to call. It was a text. "Dinner. Saturday. Everyone's home. Mom says you should come," as if those words still carried any weight. I stared at the message for hours, my heart pounding, not from fear but from a simmering rage. Not because I needed them, but because they still thought I did. They still assumed I would crawl back, head bowed, starving for scraps of their affection. That's when the idea bloomed. Not revenge. That wasn't my style. I didn't want to rage or scream. I wanted them to see what they had thrown away. Not as a plea, but as a reflection of their own blindness. I texted Marianne, "Could your driver help me make an impression Saturday night?" Her reply came within seconds. "Limo? Or something that leaves a mark?" I smiled, the first real smile in days. The plan unfolded in my mind with surprising ease, like it had always been waiting beneath the surface, simmering quietly in the depths of me. I wouldn't stride into that house with fists clenched or words loaded like bullets. That wasn't my language. Instead, I would speak in silence, in poise, in the quiet, deliberate power of someone who had stopped asking for permission. I would arrive at their table not as the discarded daughter they had tried to erase, but as the woman they never expected me to become. Draped, not in wealth, but in independence, in freedom, dressed in the satin sheen of understated luxury. They thought they sent me away with nothing. I would return as someone who had already claimed everything that mattered. Saturday stalked me like a predator, creeping forward with a tension that tightened my breath before the sun had even risen over the city skyline. It was the kind of dread you could feel under your skin before the sky gave you permission to see it. I could feel it in the twisting of my stomach as I stood before my small closet, scanning the few outfits I had carried with me from the old life. They all whispered the same thing. Survival, not statement. None of them dared to speak the language I needed them to. So I stepped outside, not toward the glittering displays of luxury boutiques, where names mattered more than fabric, but toward a little shop tucked between a flower store and an aging bookstore, a place that smelled of lavender and old paper. Inside, the owner, a gentle older woman named Carol Simmons, welcomed me as if I were a granddaughter, returning from college, rather than a runaway grasping for a sliver of dignity. I told her I needed something for a family dinner. She didn't ask for details. She just looked at me with eyes that saw more than I said aloud, and said softly but firmly, "You want them to feel what they lost, don't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. Exactly that. And so we found it together, a black-fitted jumpsuit with a daring open back. Elegant, bold, silent in its rebellion, paired with delicate gold earrings and heels, the color of quiet confidence. It didn't shout wealth. It whispered something far more powerful. "You can't touch me anymore." When I returned to my room, I laid the outfit across my bed, as if it were sacred, studying it under the fractured glow of the city lights spilling through the window. It was strange, how fabric could become armor, how something so simple could feel like a shield forged from every scar they'd ever carved into me. Saturday afternoon, the driver Marianne had sent arrived precisely on time, his sleek, dark gray limousine idling in front of the bakery with an understated authority that turned heads without begging for them. Ruth, watching from the bakery window, offered me a small nod, a silent benediction, as if giving me permission to become the woman she already saw standing in my borrowed heels. I climbed inside, the rich scent of leather wrapping around me, mingling with the faint trace of something floral and expensive. Soft music drifted from the hidden speakers, but I barely heard it over the thunder of my own heartbeat. I exhaled slowly, whispering to myself, a quiet mantra stitched together from fractured pieces of courage. "You're not going there to prove anything. You're going to remind them of who they lost." As the limo slid through the streets of the neighborhood I once called home, everything looked painfully the same. The tidy lawns, the sterile, gleaming windows, the hedges trimmed into cruel perfection. But I had changed. I no longer rehearsed apologies in my head, no longer wondered if they would approve of what I wore, or what I said. That girl was gone. The house loomed ahead like an untouched stage set, the white siding practically glowing under the early evening light, the hedges manicured into submission. Brandon's BMW still gleamed in the driveway, like a trophy in a shrine to his greatness. I asked the driver for 2 more minutes. I needed them. I checked my reflection one last time. The makeup was flawless but soft. My eyes sharper, more certain, lips painted a deep, defiant red. There was no nervousness, only readiness. I sent Brandon a text, "Be there in 5." His reply was as predictable as the man himself, a casual thumbs up, as if he couldn't be bothered to type out words. I imagined them inside. Victoria critiquing the dinner rolls she probably hadn't baked. Richard pretending to read his phone to avoid the discomfort simmering beneath the surface. Brandon still holding court as the eternal son of the Pierce family universe. I wondered if they'd even bothered to set a place for me, but it didn't matter now. The limo pulled to a soft, deliberate stop. Gravel crunched beneath the heavy tires, the sound oddly satisfying. I could feel the shift in the air, like the whole block sensed something was about to fracture. The driver stepped out, came around, and opened the door for me. I stepped out, and everything stopped. For the first time, they all looked at me. Really looked at me. Brandon's grin faltered. Victoria's gaze narrowed, lips pressed into a line so thin it could have been a blade. Richard lingered in the doorway, his face unreadable, as if he were watching a scene from a play he didn't understand. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply stood there, tall, composed, untouchable. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't the neglected shadow lingering at the edges of their perfect family photograph. I was the reckoning they never saw coming. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Brandon broke it first, his voice forced into light sarcasm, the weapon he always reached for when the ground shifted under his feet. "Well, someone's trying hard tonight," he drawled, but the words stumbled from his lips, laced with something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Victoria stepped forward, arms crossing like a shield, her gaze crawling over me like she was dissecting something she couldn't quite name. "You came in a limo?" she spat, her voice a bitter cocktail of mockery and accusation. "Where'd you get the money for that?" I allowed myself a faint smile, not wide, not smug, just enough to remind her I heard the question, but she wasn't entitled to the answer. Behind her, Richard stood silent, eyes flickering between us like he was watching a play he had no desire to be in. "I didn't come to impress you," I said finally, my voice even, laced with a calmness that rattled even me. "I came to show you what you let go." Brandon snorted, but no one laughed with him. Even he could feel it now. This wasn't the same game anymore. We stood there, a tableau of old ghosts and new storms, me standing in heels on their surgically polished driveway, them staring as though they couldn't recognize the girl who had slipped through their fingers. Victoria turned abruptly, muttering over her shoulder, "Dinner's getting cold. If you're coming in, come in." I didn't move. I let her march inside first, her posture tight with unspoken rage. Brandon followed, grumbling under his breath. Richard hesitated at the door, meeting my gaze for a heartbeat with something that almost resembled apology, before stepping inside. I lingered a few moments longer, letting the cool night air wrap around me, letting the silence settle. I could have left right then, climbed back into that limousine and vanished into the night. But I hadn't come for an entrance. I came for closure. So I walked inside. The dining room was as meticulously set as I remembered, plates aligned like soldiers. A bottle of wine Brandon wasn't even old enough to drink from proudly placed at the center. The roast on the table smelled suspiciously store-bought. Victoria never did master the art of home cooking, no matter how hard she tried to stage the illusion. They sat, no one uttering a word of grace, no one asking how I'd been, like I was a stranger at their table. Finally, Brandon broke the suffocating silence, leaning back in his chair, smirking. "So what, you're rich now?" I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he looked small, still trapped in this house, still orbiting their empty approval like it was the sun, still smug but hollow inside. "No," I said softly, but with the weight of steel behind it. "But I'm free, and I'm doing better without you." Victoria scoffed, an elegant sneer curling on her lips, a sound that dripped with the same icy disdain she had perfected over the years. "Oh, please," she hissed, her voice brittle, snapping through the room like glass under pressure. "Don't act like we never gave you anything." I tilted my head, letting the silence bloom between us, letting her words hang in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I kept my tone measured, almost gentle. "You're right," I said, the weight of it wrapping my words in velvet and steel. "You did give me something." She blinked, a flicker of confusion flashing across her face, fracturing that porcelain mask of superiority she wore like a crown. "What?" she asked, as if she couldn't fathom what I might credit them for. I leaned forward then, resting my elbows on the perfectly polished table, the gesture casual but heavy with intent. "A one-way bus ticket," I said, my voice soft but sharp enough to slice through the carefully maintained illusion of her control. And there it was, that moment of stillness where the air seemed to turn solid, heavy, suffocating. The silence that followed was not the awkward kind of strained family dinners, but the silence of impact, of realization. She understood. They all did. I hadn't come to beg for scraps at their table. I hadn't come to flaunt shiny success. I had come to draw a line so blindingly clear that none of them would mistake me for the forgotten girl at the corner of their picture-perfect lives ever again. I stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from my jumpsuit, as if shedding the years of smallness they had wrapped me in like a suffocating blanket. "I don't need this dinner," I said, my voice low but filling every inch of the sterile dining room. "I don't need this house. And I don't need your love." I paused, letting the words settle into the gleaming hardwood floors, into the cracks of their perfect facade, before adding, with a strength I never knew lived in my lungs, "I don't need you." The words drifted over them like smoke curling through a room after a fire has consumed everything flammable. No one spoke. Not Victoria, not Brandon, not Richard. They sat there, silent, statues frozen in a tableau of their own making. I turned toward the door, each step punctuated by the click of my heels on their gleaming floor, a sound louder and prouder than any words I could have said. I stepped out into the night, the limo door already opened by the driver, waiting patiently like he knew this exit was the only one that mattered. I slid inside without a word, watching the city lights blur into molten gold streaks across the tinted glass, as the car pulled away, carrying me towards something that, for the first time, felt like peace. The ride back was quiet, but not the empty, hollow quiet that gnawed at you in the dark. This was the kind of quiet that felt earned, sacred. I rested my head against the cool window, the hum of the city wrapping around me, and realized something that struck me harder than any of their words ever could. I didn't feel like I was running away anymore. I wasn't escaping, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was simply at peace. I thought about that dinner, how none of them followed me out, how not one of them tried to stop me or ask me to stay. And the strangest part was, it didn't hurt. Not the way I always thought it would. There was no sting, no lump clawing its way up my throat. There was only a quiet, bone-deep certainty that I had made the right choice. They had never really seen me, and maybe they never would. But for the first time, I understood that wasn't my loss to grieve. It was theirs. I had spent so many years folding myself into the tiny suffocating box they made for me, shrinking my voice, sanding down my edges, trying to become someone easier, quieter, more palatable. I twisted myself into something they could tolerate, thinking maybe if I tried hard enough, I'd finally earn their approval. But love, I realized, isn't something you should have to chase like a lost dog in a storm. It's supposed to find you where you are. I used to think that ticket was the cruelest thing they ever gave me. Now I knew it was the greatest gift. It forced me to begin again, to build a life not under the oppressive shadow of the Pierce family, but under my own name, on my own terms. It showed me how capable I was, how resilient, how powerful I could be when I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me who I was allowed to become. I don't live above the bakery anymore. A month after that dinner, Marianne promoted me to creative lead at her startup. I took the money I had scraped together and rented a small loft downtown. My space, my rules, my world. I bought my own furniture, picked my own art, played my own music loud enough to drown out any ghosts. And I framed that bus ticket, the original one-way to Phoenix. I hung it by the door, not as a scar, but as a badge of honor. Do I talk to them? Not really. Richard sent a vague message weeks later. Hope you're doing well. I didn't reply. Brandon tagged me once in an Instagram story, a passive-aggressive quote about family always coming back. I muted him. Victoria? Nothing. And honestly, I prefer it that way. I don't hate them. Hate would mean I was still giving them something. I've let go of waiting for an apology they'll never give, of holding my breath for closure from people who wouldn't recognize it if it sat on their perfect polished table. I gave myself the closure. I gave myself the life I deserve. And if you're reading this, if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like you were the ghost in someone else's story, I want you to hear me. You are already enough. You don't need their permission to become who you were always meant to be. You don't need their applause, their acceptance, or their acknowledgement. You need you. That bus ticket wasn't punishment. It was my freedom slip. And that limo? It wasn't revenge. It was a full circle moment. A quiet declaration, not look at me now, but I finally see myself now. And that was all I ever really needed. So no, I didn't get the car. I got something infinitely better. I got away. If you're still holding your own metaphorical ticket, whatever that looks like, know that it might feel like a sentence, but it could be your escape, your way into power, into peace, into the life waiting for you beyond the people who tried to make you feel small. This isn't just my story. It could be yours, too. And if it is, I hope you run with it. Because no matter where your journey starts, whether with a bus ticket, a slammed door, or a quiet, defiant breath, it's yours to claim, yours to rewrite, yours to own. And if stories like this resonate with you, if they remind you that you're not alone in the messy, beautiful work of becoming yourself, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe to my channel, like this video, and join a community where we rewrite the stories others tried to write for us. Sometimes we all need a little reminder that our endings can be our beginnings.